I know all of you are not Americans, right? But we have a few American guests here this morning, so we might have a few more hands. I'm waiting for my PowerPoint to get up. We're continuing our series, ReMARKable, in the Gospel of Mark. We're in chapter 6 this morning. And how many of you, tell me it's not connected. We have a few technical difficulties this morning. But anyway, how many of you know Michael Jordan? Have you heard of him? All right. Some of you haven't? Too young, maybe? I don't know. Do you know who he is in this picture? Which one is Michael Jordan? It's the one in the center front kneeling by the ball. This was taken when he was in high school in his junior varsity team. He's wearing the shirt with the number 44. And even though Michael played very hard, in fact, he was not seen as a potential future star. Can you believe that? It's so much so that his coach decided to cut Michael Jordan from the varsity team because he was too short and he just wasn't good enough. So his own teammates couldn't even see the greatness that was in Michael Jordan right in front of them, right as they played alongside of them. It was only years later that the world called him the greatest player of all time. Now, we can look back, of course. We know, most of us know Michael Jordan, or you've seen the movies. But we're like, how could they not see it, you know? In this 15-year-old kid that he would become this great basketball player. Well, it was a little bit like that with the disciples as they walked with Jesus. Make sure the screen is selected. Yeah, great. It's not connecting, Tommy. Sorry. Yeah, make sure that screen is selected so I can click. It is. Unplug and replug the USB again. Yeah, now it's working. Oh. All right. In the same boat again. Well, the disciples, they walked with Jesus day in, day out. They were his inner circle. They were the crew. They were serving with him. They were helping out other peoples, and they could see his miracles. In fact, they had just witnessed Jesus multiplying bread so that 5,000 men and wives and children could eat. But now they were stuck in the same boat again. If you were here last week, I was talking about Mark chapter 5, and they were stuck in the boat in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the storm. But this time, Jesus is not with them in the boat. And they weren't getting anywhere. They were rowing against a very hard wind, and they were not getting across the lake. But at the same time, they were also struggling with trying to understand who is Jesus. Last time they'd been about, Jesus calmed the winds, and they asked, who is this man? Who is he really, truly? And still, today in chapter 6, who is Jesus? You know, we might look back and wonder, why can't they just see it? I mean, they would look at all the miracles Jesus did one after the other. Look at what the demons said, that he is the Son of God. Why didn't they get it? But they just could not see Jesus for who he truly was. And so today I want to talk about how Jesus is the remarkable prophet, that actually Jesus surpassed all past prophets in the Old Testament, all of them, the big ones, the little ones, and any prophet that might have come after Jesus. Jesus surpasses them all. You know, we can so easily miss out on who Jesus is by just thinking, oh, Jesus is just a prophet, or Jesus is just a teacher, maybe a good teacher, maybe a very inspirational teacher, but he is just one of the teachers. Or even we might believe Jesus did miracles. He was a miracle worker. But we might miss out on so much of who Jesus is. You know, positively, we want to experience Jesus and his presence in our life. If Jesus truly is God and he's divine and his Spirit is poured out in us, we can experience his presence in our life on a daily basis. But if we cannot figure out who this Jesus is, if we cannot make a decision to trust him and to believe in him as not only a teacher or a prophet, but as the Son of God, we will miss out on everything that Jesus wants to give to us. And so perhaps you are here this morning and you are on a journey to figure out, who is this Jesus? Was he only a historical teacher? Did he truly do miracles, or did they just make up those stories? Maybe it's a legend or a myth. Maybe you are here and asking those kinds of questions. But perhaps you are here this morning, and like so many people in the stories, they come to Jesus wanting his help, wanting his healing, wanting miracles in their lives, because, the fact of life is we have many challenges, many troubles. Even this morning we are praying for many who are facing illness and sickness and dire situations. But even for us who are mature Christians, we can still stumble on the point of, okay, I believe Jesus was historical, but is he truly God? And even for those who grew up in church or who've been walking the Christian faith, we might be following Jesus as an example, but are we truly worshiping him as God? Well, as the 12 were stuck in the boat, they had lots of time again to think about who is this Jesus and recall what happened since the last time when they had been stuck in the boat. If you remember last week, we talked about the demonized man who had no faith to begin with, and still Jesus intervened in his life and he was restored back to normality. He was freed from the demon spirits. And then this woman who had been bleeding for 12 years had just a little bit of faith by just touching Jesus' robe, and yet she was healed. And then Jairus, the synagogue ruler, who just demonstrated such great faith until the news reached him that his daughter had died, and his faith started to falter. And yet Jesus intervened and raised his daughter back to life. And so they had experienced all of these things. After that, they walked home, and then they kept walking and came in Jesus' hometown, Nazareth. And in Nazareth, Jesus, at his home church, so to speak, his synagogue, where he grew up as a child, he came there and taught, and the people were so amazed at his teachings. They said, "Where did this man get all these things?" They asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. You know, familiarity can really blind people. We stop seeing who the people really are because we have presumptions of who they used to be or should be. And the people in Jesus' hometown took offense at him. They completely missed out on who Jesus truly is. And so Jesus replied to them. He said, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home." Well, maybe you can relate to that. If you're Vietnamese and this past Tet holiday, you went back to your family in the province, so to speak, and maybe you've been here in Hanoi for some time, you've studied, maybe got a job, and you're a changed person. But you go back home, and they don't see you for who you are today. They just see you for who you used to be in the past. You're just part of the family, just a brother or a sister. And maybe You've even become a Christian while you're here in Hanoi and part of HIF. But you go back home and you tell that story of how you've come to faith in Jesus and changed his life, but they don't want to hear it. They just want you who you used to be, just a normal person. Or for us expatriates, every time we go back to our home country, do you have this feeling of a letdown? Of like, oh, everybody else looks like me. Here I look different. I'm taller, I have blonde hair, I have white skin, I have more income, I'm a respected person, maybe you're an executive or a teacher, but you get back home and you're just like everyone else. You're just somebody, or maybe you're even seen as a nobody, this weird person living overseas. Why aren't they living over here? And they just don't want to listen to your stories that you have to tell about your life here in Hanoi. Ever experienced that? Well, Jesus, that's what he experienced when he got to Nazareth. They just could not see him for who he truly is. They only wanted to see him for who he was in the past. And so Jesus leaves Nazareth and he goes around teaching village to village. And then he calls the 12 disciples, his followers, his inner crew, and he sends them out 2 by 2 and gives them authority over evil spirits to cast them out and over sickness to heal people. Now, throughout the Old Testament, you do not find any prophet who does this kind of thing. Jesus truly is unique. He really surpasses all these prophets. And, just as a side note, when it says he send them out is actually the verb apostolos, which is why we call them apostles, which just means to be sent out. And so these apostles, the 12, were just like the 12 spies from the 12 tribes of Israel when Moses had sent them into the promised land. The 12 apostles now had become ambassadors of Jesus' kingdom, representing Jesus' authority and authorized to act on it. And this was Jesus' instructions to the 12. He said, take nothing for the journey except a staff, so no bread, no bag, no money, no extra shirt, just sandals. So they traveled really light and no extra luggage needed. And when you enter a house, stay in that house until you leave town. Don't go swapping and looking for bigger houses and nicer meals. Just stay in the house of whoever invited you first. And if any place will not welcome or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust of your feet as a testimony against them. They had to expect that if Jesus got rejected, they also would be rejected, misunderstood, even chased out of town. Well, the 12 went out and preached the gospel and drove out so many demons and anointed so many sick and healed so many people that stories went around and all kinds of rumors were told about who is this Jesus. In fact, he had become so famous that King Herod had heard about him. And so they asked, who is this Jesus? And some would say, well, he is Elijah. And others would say, well, he is a prophet from the past who has come back to life or maybe reincarnated or born again or somehow. But Herod himself, he got scared to death. He's like, this is John the Baptist who I beheaded. And now John the Baptist has risen from the dead. I mean, what kind of superstition did Herod have? Because Herod, he had arrested John the Baptist, who was a prophet, a forerunner of Jesus, and had confronted Herod about stealing his own brother's wife. He had taken Philip's wife, Herodias, and married her instead. And John had said, this is not right. And so Herod couldn't stand it. Arrested John, put him in prison, and then sometime later, he hosted this party with all kinds of elite and officials and military present, And then the daughter of his wife does this beautiful dance, and he says to his daughter, ask me for anything. I'll give you anything, up to half of my kingdom. Well, now the mother, Herodias, sees his opportunity to scheme behind the scenes, to manipulate her daughter, and to ask for the head of John the Baptist. Well, Herod can't back out of his oath in front of all his guests. He would lose face, and he can't do that, so he orders the beheading of John and serves the head on a platter to the daughter of Herodias. And in many ways, literally now, Jesus had surpassed John the Baptist, the forerunner. Well, when Michael Jordan played his final NBA in 2003, by that time he had gained 6 NBA championships, 5 most valuable player awards for the NBA, and 10 scoring titles and numerous records that he had broken. And forever he was marked as the greatest NBA player of all time. But people, they saw Jesus just as a teacher, as a prophet, as a miracle worker, just like they saw Michael Jordan as this junior varsity player that would not be up to any good. And so people in Jesus' time, they just missed completely recognizing that the greatest prophet of all time was walking right among them. Just so remarkable. And so when the 12 returned and told Jesus everything about what God had done through them and through the power that he had given them authority over, they were completely exhausted. And Jesus says, let's get away. Let's go on a retreat. Let's take some time to rest. Remember, we said that last week in Mark 5. Jesus told them and they were excited to get away from the crowds and to leave it all behind and have some 12-on-1 time with Jesus. But again, this time, they were very much mistaken. There was no rest, no retreat, only more people waiting for them. Because they had seen him leave, ran along the shore, followed them along, and by the time they landed in Gennesaret, there were crowds waiting for Jesus. And as soon as Jesus saw the crowds, instead of going like, oh, compassion filled his heart. And he started to serve them, to heal them, to teach them. Because it says they were like sheep without a shepherd. And here we see such a stark contrast between Herod, the king, who was supposed to care for his people, and Jesus, the nobody that nobody's recognizing, that who is the real, true shepherd, caring and having compassion for those who are in need. You know, Herod was so concerned about losing face. He was so concerned about his own welfare. Whereas Jesus, he's constantly giving of himself, pouring himself out into the lives of other people. And so Jesus began teaching this crowd, this suddenly a very impromptu conference. Now it was getting late and a problem arose. Now I don't know if you've managed any large events, any of you done large-scale events, conferences, etc. One of the major costs of an event like that is food. Last time in this December, when we had the Christmas festival down the road here, you know, we were expecting 20,000 people, and we actually had 20,000 people show up. But guess what? We did not plan to feed 20,000 people. We didn't have enough vendors and not enough food, and a lot of people actually went hungry during the festival. Sad to say. But the disciples, they saw this problem. They didn't have any food to give to these people. Now it was late in the day, and they told Jesus, send them home. Or send them away to buy some food. But Jesus flips it right back at them, and he says, well, you give them some food. And they panicked. That would cost half a year's salary. Think about it. How much is half a year of your salary? Would you be willing to donate half of your salary to the next festival to feed people? I didn't find anybody last year making that kind of donation. But Jesus asked them, well, how many loaves of bread do we have? How much food is there actually here amongst all these people? And so they searched around and only found 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That's all they had. Jesus told them then to organize the crowd, sit them down in groups of 50 and 100, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looks to heaven, and then he prays over the food, and then he starts to break the bread and hand it out to the disciples to disperse it and distribute it, and it just kept on going. It just kept on multiplying. It just, until everybody had eaten, everybody was satisfied, and there was still bread left over at the end. Just truly a remarkable miracle. 5,000 men and their wives and their children who had come along ate more than plenty. Jesus provided for them in abundance. And nothing that was put into his hands ever ran out. And this really reminds us of Moses. Moses who led Israel into the wilderness. They camped into groups, surrounded the tabernacle where the presence of God was. And then God provided manna for Israel for 40 years, and they never ran out. Every day there was enough. There never was too little, never was too much. Jesus now is surpassing Moses. He is a greater prophet than Moses. He is a greater provider than Moses. And unlike Herod's banquet, which was just for a select few people, the elite, only the top, only those that paid him would be able to come, Jesus' banquet welcomed everyone. Herod had hoarded power, and he indulged himself, whereas Jesus, he was giving out power and pouring out himself into people. And Herod's banquet had ended up in death, the death of John the Baptist, whereas Jesus' banquet was bringing life and restoring life to the masses. But how about you this morning? Are you seeking Jesus for what he has to give you? Like the crowds here in this story, they came to Jesus wanting something from Jesus, whether it was his teaching or his blessing or his healing, his freedom from evil oppression. They came to Jesus for what Jesus could give him. And Jesus wants to give. He wants to pour out. He is here for you. But Jesus, yes, he is a remarkable provider, but he is so much more than that. Well, after this whole impromptu festival, so to speak, feeding 5,000 people, I don't know, breaking bread for 5,000, that should have been tiring. He sent his disciples out on the lake while he gets up the mountain to pray by himself. And again, this reminds us of Moses going up the mountain to spend time with God. And if you know the story from Exodus 33 and 34, where God then passes by Moses, shows Moses his glory, and pronounces his name Yahweh, Yahweh, which means I am, I am. But Jesus, he is not praying like a human would pray to God. He is praying like he is the Son, talking to his Father, who is God. Well, the disciples struggled all night, fighting against this strong wind, and Jesus, on top of the mountain, can see them. He knows their struggle, and yet he doesn't do anything quite yet, but waits until dawn, until morning, until he starts walking on water. And it literally says he intended to pass them by. He intended to pass them by. And when the disciples saw him, they thought that he was a ghost, and they got terrified, started screaming out loud in fear. They failed completely to recognize who Jesus is, because that could possibly not be Jesus. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I." And in the Greek it truly says, "I am." Stop being afraid. And then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. And they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. And so just like God had passed by Moses, revealing his glory, his power over all of creation and declaring his name, "I am," Jesus now passed by his disciples, revealing his glory, the Lord over creation, and declaring, "I am. Do not be afraid." And then his presence, the presence of God, steps into the boat, and the wind dies down. But they don't get it. They're amazed, but they don't fully understand who Jesus is. They witness this miracle, but they miss out on the deeper truth about Jesus' identity. Their hearts are still hardened. They should have caught that if he can multiply bread, he's the God of creation. But they do not quite see it. And for us, it's like, why don't they get it? But we've read the end of the story. They just don't get it yet. And so once they landed in Gennesaret, as soon as he stepped out, people recognized him immediately, as it happened each time and again. And they started running around the whole region, carrying the sick on mats wherever they heard that Jesus was. Wherever he went, into villages, towns, countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. You know, it's so remarkable. When we remember chapter 5, last week's story, the woman with the issue of bleeding for 12 years, didn't want to jump in front of Jesus like Jairus had done, but wanted to quietly sneak behind him and just touch the edge of his robe. That little faith was enough faith for her to be healed. And this story must have spread throughout the whole region, so that now everybody had heard that you only needed little faith in who Jesus is for Jesus' power to heal you. Unlike the disciples, these outsiders saw Jesus, recognized him, who he is, and believed in him. You know, yesterday we had the Night to Shine event. If you remember, last November and December we were promoting this and recruiting volunteers, and last night was finally the event with how many volunteers showed up? Over 100 volunteers. So if you were here and you volunteered last night, which I know some of our staff and volunteers did, thank you for serving the last night. Well, the night, as one person clapped one time, yeah. A Night to Shine is a foundation and an event held across the world the week before Valentine's Day. And it's organized by this famous football player, Tim Tebow. Now, how many know Tim Tebow? So, the Americans and the Canadian and a few more people, yeah. Well, because he's an American football player. So, outside of America, they kick the ball. In America, they carry it. So, we don't really know, understand the game. But anyway, in America, he's famous. But he loves to put the spotlight on people with all kinds of disabilities, whether it's cognitive disability or hearing impaired, blind, crippled. So he puts the spotlight on them and then organizes this great ball like a prom night and invites all of them to come to the prom night so that they may be crowned as kings and queens, not just for the night, not just that day, but like he said last night, he said for every day of their life, they are now kings and queens, because that's how God of the universe sees them and how much God of the universe loves them. There was a great testimony last night. But it was so funny to see Tim taking selfies with these young adults with all kinds of disabilities or special needs. They have no clue who he is. And this big white dude. But they just love taking pictures and selfies with him. In fact, even the students from the international school who were the paparazzi, who were the cheerleaders, along the edge of the red carpet, every time a new VIP guest, as they were called, came in, they would cheer them on. And you can see in the picture, if I don't know if you can see it, Tim is standing there by himself. Nobody's paying attention to him. None of the students have no idea who they're standing next to until one of the teachers says, "Here, look on this phone. This is Tim Tebow." And they're like, "What?" Oh, and then suddenly they were lining up to take selfies. You know, Tim was right in their midst, and they didn't recognize him until somebody explained it to him. And yet, he's such a well-known football player, but even more known about his Christian faith and the leadership that he exercises, and how he uses that fame and the wealth and the power, the influence that he has for the sake of those who are not recognized in society, who are typically at the bottom level, the bottom rung of society, underserved, under-resourced, and unloved, especially in developing nations like in Vietnam, where there's very little available for them and for their families to care for them. And that's what Tim Tebow does really well. And for me, I was asked at the end what was truly a highlight for me of the evening. And really, when I saw Tim standing there in the line, cheering the VIP guests on, he was the biggest and the loudest cheerleader of all. And that truly was so inspiring, that someone like that would humbly step aside and cheer others who are considered to be the lowest and see the greatness in them and put the spotlight on them. And that is what we see in Jesus also. He is such a remarkable prophet. He surpasses all that had gone before him. Moses, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, you name it, all of them that we esteem to be great prophets of the Old Testament, he surpassed them, even to the last one, John the Baptist. But even those that we might consider prophets today, Muhammad or Buddha or Confucius or others in different religions, Jesus is the most remarkable prophet. There's no greater one than him. But people missed seeing his greatness, his divinity, his true identity. But Jesus could see the greatness, especially in those who were the least, who were often the last, who were very much lost, who were overlooked and forgotten and underserved. Even though he was the Son of God, he became man. He stepped along the red carpet and loved and served those who walked right in front of him. And he poured out himself into their lives over and over and over again. Jesus literally laid down his life for them, for you, for me. The question is, would you trust him with your own life and put your life into his hands? Imagine if we fully trust in Jesus, not just as a prophet or a teacher or a miracle worker, but as the Son of God, who loves us so much that he laid down his life for us. And what would change in our life if we fully believe this and if we completely trust ourselves into his hands? You know, faith is more than just hoping for miracles to deal with the problems that we face in life. It is in trusting that the presence of God is with us through Jesus. But if we imagine, if we continue to miss out on recognizing who he is, that, like the Nazarites who just thought he was a teacher, or like Herod, who just thought he was a reincarnated prophet, or like the disciples who just couldn't get it that he is God in the flesh. If we keep missing out on who Jesus is, we will also miss out on being with Jesus for eternity. Would you want to miss out on that? Jesus is present with us. That's his name, Emmanuel. He is for you, but will you open your heart to him? Will you trust him fully and completely? With all of your needs, all of your hopes, with all of your life. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we are so grateful that we have these words written down, these stories, these experiences that the disciples experienced firsthand and wrote down and passed them on, that today we can read and understand and look back and say, why didn't they get it? But if we really look at our own life, oftentimes we do not fully get who you are. And most of the time we are not really operating as if you are present in our life each and every day, that you care for each and every concern, that you are able to help us through each and every storm. Help us, Jesus. Open our eyes and open our hearts so that we might see you, not just follow you, but truly see you and worship you for who you are, Jesus, the Son of God, who loves us so much. We pray. Amen.